Raven Wars, by Stephen Lake. Pender flattened himself against a wall as he struggled to catch his breath. He hated being in situations like this. They usually ended badly for him. And, one of these days, it'd be his death. He leaned around the corner and searched for the Zepp that was hunting him. To his surprise, it wasn't there. Only a bright blue puddle of blood marked where it had laid a few moments earlier. Drat, he got away. Now he'll go back and report to his superiors, and then I'll really be screwed, he thought. He glanced at the pistol in his hands, and checked the power bar. 4 shots remained. If he wanted to survive this, he either needed to find more power magazines, or else learn how to kill a Zepp by hand, which was a task that even the strongest of men rarely attempted, and almost never succeeded at. He perked up as he heard a hissing sound just down the hallway, and gulped nervously as he tried to control his frayed nerves. A Zepp soon appeared in the hallway, but didn't seem to notice Pender, who was standing right next to him. Pender was relieved at this. It was at least one piece of good luck in a day jam-packed with bad. He then aimed his pistol at the Zepp's head and pulled the trigger. Its head exploded a moment later into a blue mist of gore that splattered all over the far wall. The Zepp's body twitched twice, and then collapsed. Pender drew his pistol in close to his body again, and listened for other sounds. He only heard the soft drone of the station's environmental systems, and the buzz of the lights overhead. He was surprised that the Zepp had been alone. Normally they traveled in groups of 2 or 3 at minimum. He wondered if this one hadn't been the partner of the other Zepp he'd recently, and ever so unceremoniously perforated moments earlier. He carefully slipped over to the Zepp's body and took its rifle and 2 spare magazines. Zepp rifles were clumsy and inaccurate at best, but they were better than nothing. He hit the power button on the side, bringing the weapon to life. He then cautiously wrapped his hand around the grip, put his finger on the trigger, closed his eyes, and grimaced. After a moment he opened one eye and looked at the rifle. Nothing had happened. He sighed in relief. Most good Zepp soldiers' DNA locked their weapons to prevent anyone else from using them. But this rifle appeared to be unlocked, and thus usable by anyone. Either the Zepp soldier had overlooked that one crucial detail, or else it had been a conscripted deck jockey who was not accustomed to carrying a rifle, and thus wouldn't have known to do something like that. Regardless of which it was, Pender was glad for that little blessing. It certainly beat him having his arm burned off by the security system on the rifle if it had been properly DNA locked. Pender flinched as the sound of weapons fire rang out from just down the hallway, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Apparently the Zepp were still on the hunt for him, and any other humans who had infiltrated the station. This caused him to gulp hard as he contemplated just how he was going to get back to his ship, alive, and in one piece. Especially the latter. That, in itself, would be no small task, as his ship was on the far side of the station, and there were a lot of Zepp between here and there, all of whom wanted him dead. And for good reasons too. He wasn't the best, and most feared Zepp killer in the entire galaxy for nothing. He powered down his pistol and put it in its holster. He then turned and raced down the long hallway towards what was known as the northeast quarter, and took cover in a small mechanical room along the side of the hallway. He breathed heavily as he tried to catch his breath in the thin air that surrounded him. These Kreen keep the air too thin around here. The funny part is, it doesn't seem to bother the Zepp, he thought. The sounds of boots rattling on the deck outside the small room made him stiffen in fear. Slowly he rolled the rifle to his right while leaning to his left to look through a small air slit in the wall. His heart froze. The entire hallway was full of Zepp. Where the hell did they come from, he thought to himself. While that little detail didn't really matter, he was still upset that they had shown up at all. And, if they ever realized he was in that small room, he was toast. But what could he do to ensure that they never would? Just then a thought poked at his mind. He glanced down curiously at the handle of the door to the room, and noticed a locking mechanism on it. An eyebrow went up slightly in both intrigue and welcome surprise. Who in the devil would put a lock on the inside of a mechanical room door, he thought. At this point he really didn't care who had. He was just glad it was there. He then reached down and flipped it to the locked position before stepping back, raising his rifle, and aiming it at the door. If the lock didn't hold, and the soldiers were able to get in, he'd need to either shoot his way out, or go down in a blaze of glory, because he sure as hell wasn't about to let a Zepp take him alive. Just then someone from the Zepp squad outside rattled the handle. They talked briefly about this, pointed at a few things around them, and then moved on. Within a minute the hallway was silent. Well, isn't that just convenient, thought Pender. He stepped over to the air slot, glanced out into the hallway, and found it empty. He carefully unlocked the door, and then slowly swung it open. Nothing moved. So far, so good. He leapt out of the room, quickly checked both ways, and then hurried down the hallway towards his ship. As he ran, he stumbled across 2 more Zepp patrols, but thankfully missed being spotted by both of them. Either he was extremely lucky, or the Zepp had gotten dumb lately, which he doubted to be true given who the Zepp were. He continued on for a while, and then stopped again as the thin atmosphere was quickly sucking away all of his strength. He continued on like this for a bit further until he, by what he could only consider to be amazingly good luck, stumbled onto a breather unit that was used by the local maintenance teams. Maybe today was his lucky day. Or, at the very least, one with generously greater quantities of good luck than normal. He slipped on the breather unit, took several deep, lung-filling breaths, and then smiled. The generous amounts of oxygen it was delivering to him was now coursing through his body, while returning strength to his muscles. He then used that renewed energy to quickly run, bound, scale, and scamper his way through the station, briefly at times exchanging fire with the Zepp, and at other times completely outflanking them. He soon found himself at the landing bay where his ship was docked, and saw a sight that made his heart sink. The entire bay was full of Zepp soldiers. This immediately made his day go from bad to worse. At least they didn't know his ship was there. If they had, they would have destroyed it already. It was docked against the ceiling, and fully cloaked, so there was no way they'd know it was there. Out of sight, out of mind, and safe from plunder, was what he always said. He flinched as several shots suddenly whizzed by his head. He looked down the hallway and spotted several Zepp soldiers running his way. He quickly dove behind a support pillar, and then noticed a service shaft not far away. He hurried over to it, scaled the ladder inside, and soon found himself in a small access tunnel that led back down the hall and out into a hidden level of the landing bay. From his now secret perch, he leaned out and carefully studied the Zepp soldiers that filled the landing bay below him. He then drew back as one of the soldiers looked his way. What am I going to do? If I just walk out there I'll get shot, he thought to himself. Just then he remembered he was carrying plasma grenades. A devilish grin drew across his face. He then pulled out 2, activated them, and tossed both through the crevice in front of him. That ought to create a nice diversion, he thought. He listened as they rattled to the bottom of the shaft, and then seemed to take an eternity to detonate. But, when they finally did, instead of hearing 2 loud bangs as he'd expected, he was instead blown off his feet by a powerful shockwave that raced up the shaft, ripped the walls apart, and caused part of the walkway he was on to buckle. The floors and walls around him vibrated with the intensity of the explosion as the bulkheads groaned in protest. He swore. Wonderful. It's just my luck that I'd hit a main power transfer. I guess I've finally used up the last of my good luck for the day, he muttered. Suddenly the floor shifted, causing part of the wall to crack and fell away behind him. Oh. That's not good, he thought. He then grabbed a section of the wall and steadied himself as the station shuddered and shook violently under him. Fire alarms soon began to sound, followed by evacuation alarms as explosions quickly tore through the station like a flood. He swore again. Somehow he'd gone from creating a distraction to destroying the entire station. Fire soon shot up through the floor below him, threatening to burn him alive. But, before he could move, the floor shattered, and then vanished into an ever-widening fiery chasm. He soon heard the rush of air as it began pouring out of numerous breaches in the station's hull. Now might be a good time to make swift with the feet, he thought. He stood up and bolted quickly out onto the catwalks that spread across the ceiling of the landing bay. Zepp soldiers or not, if he didn't get out of there soon, he was dead. As he ran, he half expected to hear blaster shots whizzing past his head in a withering hail of fire. But, to his complete surprise, he instead found the landing bay completely deserted. He glanced down at the floor beneath him, and quickly saw why. Large sections of its floor had already fallen away and vanished into a fiery abyss of molten metal and raging plasma fires below. Pender quickly scrambled over to where his ship was parked and reached out to see if it was still there. When his hand met invisible, cold steel, he smiled. He dug frantically in his pockets until he found a small remote control. He then pressed one of the buttons on it, and watched as his ship decloaked. A moment later the ship's main door opened. However, just as he was about to step in, 2 shots rang past him from below. Looking down he realized that one Zepp soldier, who had somehow miraculously survived the conflagration below, was shooting at him. He quickly dove into his ship, closed the door, and began powering it up. He felt his ship shudder under him, and knew that the station was dying fast. Thus time was quickly running out. He again activated the cloaking, and then engaged the engines as he released the docking clamps from the ceiling. The ship dropped briefly, turned, and then raced for the main door, and out into space. He felt his ship shudder under him again and leaned to one side as a large column of fire exploded past his ship. More fire erupted from the station behind him in every increasingly larger columns of molten hot debris. He drove his ship mercilessly between the other vessels gathered around the station as they all scrambled frantically to get away before it blew. Pender felt his skin crawl as collision warning alarms sounded just moments after everything around him grew a brilliant bluish white. He swore. Time was up and he needed to go. He quickly chanced a look behind himself, and was aghast to see a gigantic ravenous shockwave quickly closing on his ship. He swore as he turned back to the space ahead of him, which was now heavily clogged with fleeing ships. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" he shouted at the other ships as they seemed to do more to block his way than to clear a path for him to escape. Collision alert. Level 3 shockwave approaching. "It will overtake this vessel in 15 seconds, said his computer. Pender swore. He was more than 15 seconds away from a clear jump window. Realizing he didn't have much chance of surviving without at least partially slowing down the blast wave, he dove under a large Zepp capital ship, and put it between himself and the blast wave. He glanced behind himself and watched as the shockwave impacted the ship, and then tore it apart as though it were made of tissue paper. He swore again. Well, that didn't buy me much time, he thought. 10 seconds until terminal contact with level 3 shockwave, said the computer. Yes, I know, Mr. Obvious, exclaimed Pender. He then continued to dive and swerve between the cloud of ships in front of him as the computer continued to count down what Pender swore would be the last few seconds of his life. Suddenly, he spotted an opening between the ships ahead of him. If he could safely jump through that narrow space, then he had, at the very least, a slight chance of surviving. It was better than nothing. He reached over, computed a jump trajectory, and then pressed the activation button. Analyzing jump trajectory. "1 moment," replied the computer. "Oh, sure. Now you want to check my numbers. Why can't you ever do that when I'm not in a life-threatening situation?" he screamed at the computer. But it said nothing. Pender grunted. "Yeah, thought so," he muttered. Moments later, the computer replied, "Jump coordinates accepted. Jump commencing." He watched in relief as the ship quickly entered hyperspace. He then looked down at his sensors and was amazed at how close they had cut it. If the computer had waited just 2 more seconds, he would have been space debris. Hyperspace cruise speed achieved. Primary autonav active. Destination has been verified. Your flight time will be 2 hours, 16 minutes, said the computer. Pender exhaled in relief, pulled off his breather mask, and then slumped down in his chair. After a moment he sat up, and said with great relief, "One thing I do have to say about this job is that it's never boring." The end.